This is a short video on using Python slicing, particularly slicing strings in Python. Strings in Python are just a sequence of characters. There's nothing too mysterious about that. Each string indexes its characters starting at 0 from the left-hand side. You'll notice this string, the capital T is at 0, the period on the end is at position 16. You also can index a string starting at the right-hand side using negative indexes. The last character, in this case the period, is at position -1, and it just counts backwards to the left using negative indexes. This particular example just shows the letter A as a positive index location of 8 and a negative index location of -9. So the negative index position of the period, of course, again is -1. So you can count over. In this case also, you might say, what's the negative index position of the first letter of this string? Well, let's take a look at an example of selecting an individual character. We use square brackets, so you'll notice the code below. We have a variable called string, and the square bracket 0, of course, would select the first character. The square bracket 16 would select the last character. Then we print out those two characters concatenated together. You can try that code and see what happens. This is a similar example, but we're using negative indexing. So, as I asked you just a minute ago, the first character is at negative index 17, counting from the right, and the very last character, of course, is the -1, the period. You can try it and print and see if it works. Now, when we're talking about slicing, we're talking about selecting more than just a single character. We want to select a range of characters. So here's an example of selecting 4 characters in the middle, the I, S, the space, and the A. And so you'll notice that we are using square brackets with a colon in between the starting and ending index. So the example below shows selecting those letters using the 5:9 inside the square brackets. Now there's a little bit of an odd thing happening here. You'll notice that the 9 is the ending index, but it appears that that's not selecting the character at position 9. And indeed that's true. The starting and the ending index are used, but the ending index is not included in the selected characters. Now if you take the 9 and you subtract 5, you get 4, and indeed we are selecting 4 characters. So that kind of helps you think about it a little bit. If you want to select 4 characters, you give your starting index and then add 4 to the starting index. So in this case we selected the 5 as our starting index and added 4 to that, and we got 9 for the ending index, and we get 4 characters. So here are some examples. You'll notice in the examples below I have left out some of the starting and ending indexes. I'm using some default values. You might want to run this code and see what those various examples do when I leave out the starting and ending indexes. When we don't use starting and ending indexes, you'll notice that if you ran that code, that the start index will default to the very first character of the string, and the ending index will default to the very last character of the string. And so it makes it sometimes a little more convenient to use. So in the first case then, we had no start or end index value, but it selected every character in the string because it started at the 0th position and went all the way through the last character. The second one is actually a pretty common use of this. You indicate the starting index, and then you want to capture the rest of the string. So you give the starting index a colon, and then leave off the ending index, and it will select all the way to the last character of the string. That one's pretty common. The next one is maybe second most common. You'll notice that I'm specifying that I want 10 characters. So in this particular case, I'm saying select from the very first character, which would be position 0, the default, and give me 10 characters. So it would select the characters 0 through 9. And so that also is pretty useful. The last one is just an example of giving a starting and ending index. But in this case, notice I started at position 1, and I specified the ending index of being -1. But remember, the selection does not include the negative index. So that last example selects all but the first and last characters of the string. Now there's one other option with slicing. You can give a step option. So the step option is a third number. You'll notice the fact that there are 2 colons in the example below. So the colon again separates your numbers, your start, your end, and your step. The step option simply tells you how many characters to increment before you select. So in this particular case, it says start at 0, go to the very last character because we defaulted the ending index, and then go every other character. So we start at 0, and then we go with an increment of 2. So it goes to position 2, and then position 4, and then position 6. And you'll see then that it selects just those characters. Again, what's the default if you don't put a step option on? Well, the default, of course, would be 1. It would select every character. So this is just another example including the numbers 0, 2, 4, and so on. So essentially, to slice on a string, you use square brackets. You have optional start, end, and step values separated by colons, and it gives you a lot of flexibility on how to select a certain portion of a string. Try to figure out what's being selected in the string below.